This is Groundswell Radio with Peter Williams, standing up against unworkable regulations and providing a strong advocacy voice for everyday Kiwis.
Hello and thank you for joining us on this edition of Groundswell Radio, brought to you by Groundswell NZ. I'm your host, Peter Williams, and this week I talk with Clutha Vets Hamish Moore. He's worried about the impact on his hometown of pastoral land being turned into pine forests. Also, retired farmer and one-time Nuffield scholar Derek Kirke explains why it's wrong and unfair to tax farmers for greenhouse gas emissions. And later, Southland farmer Geoffrey Young puts his case for election to the board of Beef+Lamb New Zealand, a bid being supported by Groundswell NZ. Derek, thank you for talking with us here on Groundswell Radio. Tell us first a little bit about yourself. I know you were a farmer, but you were also able to study overseas. So where did you farm? What kind of farm did you have? And what was your overseas study about?
Sure. Peter, I farmed in Fairlie for the early part of my adult life. Our two of our blocks were on the main road between Fairlie and Geraldine, and we had another block sandwiched between Four Peaks and Clayton Station. So it was in three blocks. It was a sheep and beef farm, 2/3 sheep and 1/3 beef. We had about 120 hectares of Pinus radiata and Douglas fir forest planted on the steep faces and gullies and on the gorse country. That covers the farming. Peter, and my Nuffield farming scholarship topic was the production, manufacture and marketing of wool and man-made fibres. And the goal of my study was to try and assess whether wool had a future, because wool was starting to face some tough times. So it was an interesting topic to be studied.
Yeah, indeed. How long ago did you do that, Derek?
That was 1985.
Right, so best part of 30 years ago. The question, does wool have a future? Gee, it's a question we're still asking ourselves today, but that's not the topic of our conversation today, Derek. What got you interested in the science of animal emissions and their impact, or rather lack of impact, on the climate?
Well, to be honest, Peter, I really didn't have a huge interest on it. Although I retired from active farming about 20 years ago, I've always had a strong interest in farming matters, but I hadn't really focused on this climate change and farming topic at all until I started seeing very good farmland being sacrificed into trees. That's been happening over the last 18 months, and I became more and more vocal with my wife while driving between Wanaka and Dunedin. Lorraine, my wife, said to me, "Well, look, if you're so passionate about this, why don't you damn well do something about it?" So I agreed with her that I should do something about it. So from early December last year, I took the topic very seriously and tried to do my homework as carefully as I could and read a lot about it. And the more I studied, the more convinced I have become that as far as farming is concerned, the current program makes no sense. And even more important, if it continues along the way it's going, not only will it destroy a lot of farming businesses and communities, it will do untold damage to our economy. So that's my background on the topic, Peter.
Fair enough. Well, in the article you wrote for the Otago Daily Times a few days ago, you say that agriculture is not the cause of half of New Zealand's global warming emissions. Now, that's a big statement, Derek, because, of course, we've had it repeated so often that sheep and cattle emissions are responsible for around, I think the number's 47% of the country's greenhouse gas emissions, and that number is taken as a fact by most. So explain to me then why that number is wrong.
Well, the number is calculated, and I think it's a bad calculation anyway. But it's based on whoever put the number together. It's based on the gross output of methane and nitrogen, and there's no account in that calculation made for the fact that all the methane that comes from our animals began its life as carbon dioxide, which was absorbed by plants, which is vital in this calculation. So it's a gross calculation, not a net calculation. And for nitrogen, most of the nitrogen output in farming began its life as nitrogen gas, and that's converted by plants to protein and by nitrogen absorbing microbes, which live in the roots of all our legumes. So for pasture, this is mostly clover, of course, and a lot of farmers grow lucerne as a specialist crop. And lucerne is a wonderful sequester of both carbon dioxide and nitrogen gas. And under the proposed scheme and under the calculations, there is no acknowledgement given to farmers for the sequestration of gases in pastures.
So,
Sorry, that's a bit long.
Yeah, no, I
long.
understand completely because in high school we learned about this wonderful thing called photosynthesis, which absorbs CO2 to make grass and plants and trees grow. So New Zealand farmers can't claim carbon sequestration credits for grass and crops and also native trees. Can you figure out why that should be, Derek?
No, it makes absolutely no sense to me whatsoever. And it's quite interesting when I started doing my reading, Peter, on this. If you're quite right, 50 years ago, if you'd looked up the carbon cycle, photosynthesis would have been at the forefront of it. If you Google the carbon cycle today, it's quite hard to find any acknowledgement of photosynthesis and its importance in the carbon cycle. So, and the very basic science of photosynthesis that nobody in New Zealand should forget is that every 1 unit of CO2 absorbed by a plant, and CO2 is a greenhouse gas, it will release 1 unit of oxygen, which isn't a greenhouse gas. So it's very, very important that this is understood and that it should figure very much at the forefront of all of our calculations.
Indeed. Now, you've also written about the huge amount of pasture being taken out of food production because the landowners can make more money growing pine trees and getting the carbon credits for them. It's all part of this ETS, the emissions trading scheme. Now, you say the balance is all wrong because there is no calculation in the ETS for the photosynthesizing grass, which won't exist anymore when the trees are planted on it. So it seems quite logical what you're saying. Can you just explain a bit more there?
I don't know if I can add too much to what you've just said, but I do think even it's much worse than the split gas proposal is what's happening within the emissions trading scheme, because the price of carbon has become so out of kilter with the normal returns from running a farm, and so the economic benefits of locking up whole farms into forests, and you can't blame farmers for taking this opportunity, but the economic benefit of doing that is about 3 times greater than to stay on the land as a hard-working farmer and carry on producing beef and lamb. So because of that huge disparity and distortion, I would say, as well, it is a huge market distortion. Good farms will continue to disappear into forests at a very fast pace. And you're quite right. There's no calculation made for the loss of all that photosynthesis sizing pasture over the lifetime of the forest, and that should be calculated in the emissions trading scheme, costs and benefits.
Indeed.
Around forestry.
Yeah. Derek, do you know of any
I-
other countries where food producing land is being incentivized to become forestry and taken out of food production, or are we on our own in this?
I haven't, to be honest, I haven't really specifically studied that topic, but as far as I know, that there are no other countries doing it in the way we're proposing and are doing it. I do know that the big industrial economies like the UK, USA, and Europe, they use subsidies rather than taxes to try and influence environmental outcomes. But in New Zealand, we mustn't and can't do that because agriculture's such a big part of our economy. We simply can't afford to distort our businesses with huge government subsidies. It's just not a sensible solution. So, haven't answered your question very well there, Peter. But to the best of my knowledge, we're quite alone. But just on what happens in other countries, just as an aside, Peter, I did discover that Australia and the United States, some animal farmers of ruminant animals, they are rewarded for building soil organic matter, and the climate change benefits of that are acknowledged, and farmers of ruminant animals are receiving a payment for the soil build-up of organic matter. That makes a lot of sense to me, and as far as I know, there's no discussion in New Zealand about that, because it is another important part of the whole equation, in my view.
Indeed. Do you actually think, like many an agricultural scientist does in this country, that New Zealand farmers are really net carbon zero already, if not, in fact, carbon positive? In other words, they're sequestering and reusing more CO2 than emitting it?
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement, Peter. Even though it is accurate to acknowledge that the global warming activities of methane are a lot higher than in carbon dioxide global warming properties, but it's a very small quantity relative to the CO2 that's absorbed by plants to produce that methane. Overall, Peter, I think the science is totally flawed, and it needs to be completely done again and done properly.
Well, we can only hope, and perhaps a change of government might make a difference. Just finally, Derek, I'm intrigued by your comparison between farming 40 years ago and today, and the remarkable increase in efficiency since the days of Muldoon, the GMPs, the guaranteed minimum prices. The story is amazing because you say we produce as much sheep meat now from 50% less animals. How's that happened?
Well, it's a wonderful story, really. It's a story to a large degree of animal breeding. We bought some new breeds to New Zealand that are much more fertile than the breeds we previously had, and also we brought in animals that had a better composition for producing meat, because of course the equation between meat and wool changed dramatically. So it's a combination of animal breeding, very good husbandry on most farms now, and good science that goes with that. And a good example of that, Peter, is that when I was in my early days of farming, a sheep farm would produce about 110% of lambs from its flock. And today that number is about 160%. And lamb carcass weights at slaughter are much higher. So it's a combination of things, Peter. But it's, I haven't done the science around it, but we are carrying a lot a fewer number of sheep through the winter than we previously carried, for a great deal more meat production. So it's a good story, and it is a story of efficiency.
Indeed. Derek Kirke, thank you so much for talking with us on Groundswell Radio today.
It's my pleasure, Peter. Bye now.
Groundswell Radio with Peter Williams, bringing town and country together. This is Groundswell Radio with Peter Williams, standing up against unworkable regulations and providing a strong advocacy voice for everyday Kiwis.
Hamish Moore is a vet in Clutha, part of the important rural servicing sector in South Otago, but he's looking on anxiously as more and more productive land is being taken out of farming and put into forestry because growing pine trees for carbon sequestration credits is, well, a better way to make money. Now, that's going to have an impact on his business and on many other rural servicing businesses in his area of South Otago and elsewhere. Hamish is here to talk about the issue and what might be done to stop this loss of pastoral land. So, Hamish, thank you for joining us here on Groundswell Radio. Firstly, tell us a bit about your veterinary business. Do you deal primarily with farm animals, or do you do domestic animals as well?
Oh, hi, Peter. It's great to be on the show this morning. Clutha Vets is an incorporated society, so it's actually owned by its farm members, and we have about 1,800 of those. 1,800 members, which are probably about 1,000 of farms. So we've got a lot of sheep and beef farms, a couple of hundred dairy farms, and we've got a lot of small animal clients as well. So we're sort of covering all spectrums of the veterinary world. A few horse clients as well, and we service quite a large area from sort of the airport down into the Catlins and towards Gore and up to the hills towards Lawrence and Beaumont.
So you do a lot of driving, obviously. Tell us again, how many farms would you work with? Did you say about 1,000?
Well, there's about 200 sheep farms and then probably 500 or 600 commercial 200 dairy farms and 500 or 600 commercial sheep beef farms. And then there's probably another couple of hundred of sort of smaller block farms, sort of lifestyle type things. And then we've got quite a number of small animal members as well.
That's
it's a reasonable
for the cats and dogs at home. Yeah,
a lot of cats and dogs on farms as well. But yeah, plenty of we get a lot of clients coming out of Dunedin now as well with some issues up there with their veterinary services.
So, what size staff do you have in terms of vets on the front line?
We've got about 24 vets, about 60 staff in total, and probably about 4 vets are doing small animals and full time. And then, probably another 15 full-time equivalents doing large animal work. But, people work part-time and that, so we have about 24 vets in total. Yeah.
Gee, it's a big business. You say you're an incorporated society. What sort of revenue would the organisation have?
We've got a turnover. Last year the turnover was 21 million. And, we sort of have a system where we give back large portions of the profits to the members. So we gave back $550,000 last year to the farmers or the members, and that's sort of how we run the practice: give back the profits to the members, and the membership enjoys that.
Yeah. So you're a not insignificant business in South Otago, but how much do you think you've lost with farms stopping the pastoral grazing and going to forestry?
So I started looking at this a few months ago, and I was sort of collating what farms were going to trees. And so at the moment I've got 24 farms on the list that are either partly or completely going to trees. And we've sort of had a bit of a workout. It's hard to get the exact stock figures that would be going because some of the farms are sort of partly going to trees. But we came out of about 111,000 stock units would be lost, and those 24 farms spent $432,000 with us, averaged over the last 3 years, and that represents about 2% of our turnover. So it's only 2%, but it's still a pretty large chunk of money.
Well, yes, it is 2%, 400,000 in 21 million, but it's still there, and I suspect that you think that particular activity is going to grow as well, and it's going to become more prevalent, not just around your area, but in other places around the country as well. Tell me, Hamish, did you talk to the farmers, the owners of the land, before they went from animals to trees?
I haven't rung each farmer. I've talked to some farmers just incidentally, but no, I mean, a lot of them are just, the tree guys are paying slightly more than what the sheep and beef guys can pay. So that means that when the farm comes up for sale, the best bid is coming from the tree people, and also the enterprises that are buying these farms for trees are often making cash offers, which usually if a farmer's buying another farm, he has to sell the farm he's got or raise the finance from somewhere. So cash offer is always a lot more sought after than someone who's got a finance clause in the...
Indeed, it's like in any property transaction, isn't it? The cash buyer is always the attractive one, especially if it's unconditional. So the farms that have been sold, do you believe that they've been sold because the farmer, the owner-operator is coming to the end of their careers and don't have family, next generation to pass it on to? Or are they getting out of the industry because there's much better money to be made in planting trees rather than grazing sheep or beef or running a dairy farm?
It's a bit of both, really. I think a lot of them are probably, the farms coming up for sale because they are looking at retiring. So those farms, they're selling them because they want to sell and move on, and there's quite a lot of that happening. There's also there's one farm in particular that's actually got a dairy farm that part of it's gone into trees, and that's actually owned by the people. They actually decided just to put the farm in trees as opposed to sell it. So they weren't looking at retiring, but they, as I understand it, were just looking to change the business model. So there's a bit of both going on, but probably mainly older people retiring and wanting to get out, and the best offer that comes up is the tree people. A lot of these farms are not haven't got any dairy capability in terms of grazing. They might be a little bit steeper. They're still good rolling sort of farms, but they're not in the dairy type area. So the sheep and beef property, and so the profits on those are a lot lower, and there's not as much money to be made. So the tree profits really just blow the sheep and beef profits out of the water.
Indeed. So in a town like Clutha, how much of the economy do you think is about the farm services, the rural services sector? Is it quite significant?
I think basically, I remember someone on the radio saying that Clutha was one of the least affected areas by COVID because we didn't have any tourism at all. So I think it was like 5% or something. But yeah, I'd say every single business in town is connected to the rural, the farming industry in some way. I mean, everyone basically is, that's what funds the town. It's not a circular economy. It doesn't have enough happening to keep it going without the farming sector bringing the money into the area. And there's not really anything else bringing money into the area. Every single business in town basically feeds off the farms. So, they're very, very reliant on the farming sector.
So what you're saying is that if your veterinary business has dropped its turnover by a couple of percent, there's every chance that every other rural services firm in town is going to lose turnover as well, and not just the rural services companies, but the general retail stores as well.
Oh, definitely. Yep. And in places like Lawrence, where I think on my list of farms that had gone to trees, there was, 9 farms from Lawrence and another 4 or 5 from Tuapeka, which is very close to Lawrence. They're going to have a way bigger drop in income for the businesses in that area. So some areas will be hit harder than others. But yeah, certainly every business in town is relying on farms, and as soon as one shuts up shop, which is what happens when you put trees on, then there's no money being spent. I calculated that on the stock unit basis, this got from the accountants, the local accountants, they worked out that about $79 is spent per stock unit on farm working expenses, and that's things like fertiliser and rates and insurance and petrol and seed and chemical and stuff for the farm. So $79 a stock unit, if you put that across the 111,000 stock units that have been lost, that's $8.8 million out of the local economy. And so every time a farm goes to trees, the average amount was $367,000 taken out of the economy, and that's not including the farmer buying personal stuff for a living.
Those are frankly quite staggering figures there, Hamish. Absolutely staggering. What about the? I presume it's the biggest employer in town, the Silver Fern Farms Meatworks at Finnegan. Will they get to the stage where their operation itself is under threat because there won't be enough sheep from the area to kill, and not enough beef from the area to kill, so it'll put people under threat in terms of jobs there?
Well, potentially. I mean, it's probably a long way from that now, but I mean, if this is just the tip of the iceberg, then if we had a lot more farms go to trees, eventually they'd get to the point where there weren't enough animals in the area, and they're having to ship animals in from outside to kill them. Then I'd say that at that point they would be looking at the viability of the meatworks, and the meatworks is the major employer. I think it employs 800-900 people there, and there's only 4,000 people living in Clutha, so it's a major employer of people. So without that, the town would certainly and the surrounding towns would take a real hit.
So we see a major threat to a rural community such as Clutha because of this trend to have pastoral land, grazing land, go to trees. How do we push back against it? Because it's going to threaten the future of towns like yours, isn't it?
It certainly is. I mean, if it continues, I know that up on the east coast of North Island that this sort of things happen in the towns. I've driven through some towns up there, and there's not much to them. And we've got our own example. There's a whole lot of trees planted in the Tarkote Valley. I think it was back in the 80s or 90s, and there's not much there now. So, I don't know how we push back. I went and spoke to the council here, and I just wanted them to come out initially with a statement saying that they were against them and wanted to, we're going to try and look at all the options to stop them going in. It's very difficult for the councils to do too much. They can reclassify land into different classes of land. If it's if the land requires as part of the water system, they can potentially classify it as they need a consent to put trees in, but there's not a lot they can do over the whole area. It really needs to come from government. The government at the moment seems to have head in the sand about it. I'm not sure where they think the income for the country is going to come from in the future if you've got a whole lot of land just sitting in trees that maybe never harvested. So long term, it really needs the government to look long and hard at the long-term impacts of it and make some changes. And what I'd like to see would be some limits put on, how much of a farm can go into trees. And what we really want is just the steep gullies going into trees, because you don't actually lose too much productivity out of a farm if you put steep gullies into trees, depending on how much of the farm's steep gullies, obviously. But around here, 20-30% of the farm might be steep gullies that could potentially go into trees, and that would create some passive income for the farmer, make their business more viable and not lose too much productivity.
Indeed, but it comes back to a change in government policy which is somehow going to reduce the price of carbon, so therefore those carbon credits won't be as attractive to the farmers, to the multinationals in many instances, who are buying the land and planting the Pinus radiata. Hamish, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your time here on Groundswell Radio. You've explained what I believe is a major issue in the rural community, and explained it very well. And I thank you for talking to us, and hopefully we can get some action to try and solve the issue. Good on you.
Thanks, Peter.
Groundswell Radio with Peter Williams, bringing town and country together. This is Groundswell Radio with Peter Williams, standing up against unworkable regulations and providing a strong advocacy voice for everyday Kiwis.
Geoffrey Young is a Southland high country farmer and former president of Federated Farmers in Southland. He's challenging the incumbent chair, Andrew Morrison, for a seat on the board of Beef+Lamb New Zealand. It's a big call to go up against the current chair, but Geoffrey Young has been on the road around the southern part of the country, talking to farmers and trying to drum up support for his bid, a bid which is backed by Groundswell. Geoffrey, thanks for talking to us here on Groundswell Radio. So why are you standing in this election?
Yes, good evening, Peter. Look, simply I'm standing on behalf of grassroots farmers that I don't believe have been listened to adequately by Beef+Lamb New Zealand, and also the fact that I've been asked to stand by some senior Federated Farmers people and also the Groundswell people.
So just tell us what Beef+Lamb actually do for the benefit of listeners in the towns and cities. What is the job that Beef+Lamb does compared to, say, Federated Farmers?
Well, Beef+Lamb originally been set up for research and development. They do a lot of field extension work, conveying information that is relevant to farming to improve productivity and so forth for farmers. They do market access for our meat products. You know, there's a range of very good work that Beef+Lamb do. But the one issue that they have become involved with in recent years, and it's only in the last 15 to 20 years, that they've had a mandate to advocate on behalf of farmers as well. Now, traditionally, that's always been the domain of Federated Farmers, but both Dairy NZ and Beef+Lamb have had that mandate for the last 15 to 20 years, as I say, and so they're certainly advocating on behalf of their levy payers. Now, the issue really is that many farmers believe the last several years that those grassroots farmers just haven't been listened to, and the messages and thoughts and ideas of those farmers haven't been conveyed through to central government and government officials. So that is really the basis that I'm standing on to improve that cohesiveness between the three main levy bodies, well, the two levy bodies, Dairy NZ, Beef+Lamb, and Federated Farmers. So we want to have a united voice of all farmers that are all on the same page, heading in the same direction.
So are there actually too many farming groups lobbying the government in Wellington with Dairy NZ, Beef+Lamb and Federated Farmers? Would you be better to just let Federated Farmers be the main advocate, as in fact used to be the case, for the farming community, and Beef+Lamb and Dairy NZ can offer their thoughts but not actually do the lobbying themselves at government?
Well, that certainly may be the ideal situation, but I would certainly say that the complexity of rules and regulation and compliance in the last few years have probably almost committed Beef+Lamb and Dairy NZ to do some of that lobbying on behalf of the levy payers. And look, I'm very much of the view that we need to have a review of all advocacy amongst those three organisations, and what the outcome of that looks like, I'm not certain, but it may be room for a hybrid type of model where the two levy organisations do participate in some form of advocacy or lobbying, but we certainly need to go to central government and government officials with one united voice. And so I'm quite passionate about that. You know, I've aired that view at a national board level with Federated Farmers even 4 or 5 years ago.
Right, let's go to a few of the issues then, Geoffrey. Firstly, do you think farmers should have to pay for animal emissions? If not, why not?
Look, certainly not. I'm of the view that methane is a short-lived gas, and as long as we have stable or falling stock numbers, that methane is not contributing to any global warming. So I'm very much in the camp against having to pay a methane tax, which is commonly referred to. If under stable stock numbers, the science tells us that at the very most, there's a very slight warming effect of about 0.3%. So even if we had a 10% reduction of methane by 2050, that would be quite adequate to contribute to no further warming. So that really is my bottom line. But of course, we seem to have signed up in the He Waka Ikanoa with a 10% reduction by 2030. Now, look, that may be achievable with the way things are going with pine forests springing up on former sheep and beef land. But at the end of the day, we still don't want that open-ended situation where we could be liable to have to reduce methane emissions by up to 47% by 2050.
Yeah, it's extraordinary, isn't it? So, do you think that farmers understand the He Waka Ikanoa proposal? Do you understand it yourself properly?
Look, I don't believe many people understand it fully, and possibly I don't even fully understand it. But the two main issues are the methane target and the lack of sequestration claimable by farmers under that process. And so those are the two main issues that I have with the Waka Ikanoa.
So you believe, and you'll be lobbying for this if you're successful in this election, you'll be lobbying government to say there should be a lot more sequestration available and allowed on farms through things such as, grass, anything that's green, anything that's growing, not just Pinus radiata, which is obviously the plan at the moment.
Yes, absolutely, that's right. But certainly any shelter belt, any main bodies of trees, because under the ETS you have to have a minimum of 1 hectare in a solid block. So, that's just not adequate, because there's many farms around that will have quite a number of hectares in the form of shelter belts and little pockets of trees they've planted and so forth. So, certainly farmers should be able to offset that with any emissions.
Let's talk about SNAs, significant natural areas on farms. The government wants to map everybody's property with a view to saying there are parts of it you won't be allowed to farm on. Beef+Lamb actually supports this policy at the moment. So what's your thinking on it?
Well, I'm very much at the other end of the spectrum, there, Peter. We farm against a backdrop of a lot of retired land that's in the DOCA state now, and I won't beat about the bush there. In my opinion, DOCA are absolutely woeful land managers. Now, I say that from a point of view of weeds and pests and fencing. It's really difficult to get DOC to contribute to any form of boundary fencing now, and the role in terms of weeds and pests, as I say, quite woeful. But in saying that, we've got to remember that 30% of the New Zealand New Zealand land mass is under the DOCA state at the moment. There's another 2.8 million hectares of native vegetation, mainly in the form of native bushes that's on private land. So farmers are already doing their bit in terms of conservation there. So my plea is that we get things organised with DOC and make sure that we look after all of that estate, which is, as I say, 30% of the total land area in New Zealand. So I'm absolutely against money being wasted by ecologists crawling around on private property and potentially locking some of that up. It's a real impingement on property rights, and I'm dead against it.
So how would you convince the board of Beef and Lamb if you were elected? Because at the moment they've made their bed on this matter, haven't they?
Well, they appear to have, but I will thump the table if I have to get my point across here. And there's no way that I would ever support any ecologist or any authority coming onto private land to do that mapping. In Southland alone, they're looking at potentially 18 million simply to do all the mapping here. That's just another burden on ratepayers that I'm not prepared to accept.
What about farm plans, Geoffrey? As prescribed under the current Resource Management Act, Beef and Lamb again support the idea. What do you think of this?
Look, we've had this discussion for the last few years, especially after the NPS on freshwater came out. Look, initially I've been in favour of farm plans, and we will have to end up somewhere with a farm plan rather than getting consent for absolutely everything that they think we need for now. In terms of the farm plans, if they can be written by farmers, because it only needs to be, in my opinion, a basic document, and we don't want to have the ability for any other organisation to be able to come in and delve into that information. Now, by that I mean people shouldn't be able to do an OIA on people's private farm plans. But those farm plans, they do need to dovetail in with all of our other industry organisations like feed companies, milk companies, meat companies and so forth. So there's some good in them, and I'm not opposed to them, but it's the auditable side of it that may be the problem. So, some of that detail I still need to get clarified just where exactly we're going.
All right. Geoffrey, tell us about the process here. When does the voting take place? I know it's not one farmer, one vote. It's a weighted vote, isn't it, based on the number of stock units you've got? But when are the voting papers going out? When does the voting happen? When do we know the results?
Look, most farmers that have been registered will have had their postal papers with them for a week or 10 days now. So the voting closes on the 22nd of March. It's still possible for farmers to register online, because you do have to be registered and declare your stock numbers before you're eligible to vote. So you can do all of that online as long as you vote online then as well. So as I say, the voting closes on the 22nd of March, so there's still plenty of time for people to register if they need to and to vote. And I'd also like to add that dairy farmers, they contribute 44% of the levy money that Beef and Lamb gets by way of bobby calves that are processed and culled cows. So all dairy farmers that have 100 or more dairy cows or 50 other cattle are all eligible to vote. So that it is a weighted voting system, and you get one vote for every 250 sheep that you own at the end of June every year, or 50 cattle, or, as I say, 100 dairy cattle. So yes, those bigger properties do get a far bigger vote than smaller ones. But look, it's important for every farmer to have their voice, and that's what we're really pushing during this election process, that all farmers become engaged and have a vote at least.
Very good, Geoffrey.
I believe over the last several election cycles that we've got as low as sort of 26 to 18% of levy payers that are actually voting.
Very good, Geoffrey. Thank you for talking to us. Best wishes for the election result. And if you are elected, I'm sure we'll be talking again here on Groundswell Radio. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Peter. It's a pleasure.
Groundswell New Zealand, a grassroots movement you can trust to stand up against unworkable regulations. If our food producers are thriving, New Zealand is thriving.